presenting my data, and well, that's all from my side. Really, if you want to add something to it. We also discussed publications, and one takeaway that I got was that even if you are, if your paper gets selected, you get feedback. And when your paper is rejected, the feedback is just in a mandatory form, so need not be afraid of those, and have a positive point of view.
Oh, sorry, I just came. So what I got many things, many insights from Professor, but the thing that I want to emphasize that I normally really want to avoid to use two types of research, like qualitative and quantitative. But Professor Adi mentioned that it's going to be more valuable for your research if you can combine both. It will give you the paper more values, you will get more exposure if you combine those two. So I think some of us might be similar like me. We try to focus more on qualitative only or quantitative research only. So I think that's what I can get the most. Please, you do that.
She has spoken on my behalf, but I don't mind. Good afternoon. So my mentor cleared some doubts for me, like Anushruti had mentioned. My area of work is looking at how mobile technologies can help community health workers in their job, in augmenting the rural healthcare system itself. So I had certain areas which was unclear for me, and that was my community health workers. I'm taking mostly the government recruited community health workers, Ashas, ANMs and Anganwadi. So I was thinking, how will I analyze, because they all come from diverse backgrounds, and their training, exposure, all that differs. So I was worried about the analysis part, so he gave me a solution to that. And then I was also thinking if a single framework to do the work would suffice, because my fifth objective also had one of my objective included the beneficiary perspective. So for which I was thinking if I should use another framework to help me with the same. So that was one area he really helped out me. And like Anushruti said, one of my major concerns was publications, sending to publications and then getting them published. So that was another crucial area that he helped me with, giving certain conferences and publications that I could try. And he also mentioned a couple of frameworks which I could apply in examining and analyzing my data, but stick to the one framework that I'm using right now, which is very specifically to do with community health workers. I was also worried if my study is too simple, so he said no, that is fine, and I think the route I'm taking is right for now. So thank you so much, sir.
Hi, I'm Marisol, and I was in the team with Prashant and Mary. Am I saying it right? Okay. And so we got 3 very different projects we were working on, but out of those 3 projects, we got 2 main lessons. Prashant is working on a quantitative work trying to understand how ICT4D work has been done before in terms of literature. So he's doing an analysis on that work. Mary is working on environmental issues, trying to see how online and offline interactions could motivate people in Iran, neighborhoods in Iran actually, to be interested in environmental issues. And I'm working, doing qualitative work in the United States with the Latino immigrant population, specifically with parents, trying to design technology. Out of those 3 projects, the 2 lessons that we found, I have them here. The first one is, be prepared for the unknown. We kind of heard that over and over in the panel, but we saw that here also in the feedback that Kentaro gave us. For instance, Prashant's case, he's going into this idea of analyzing the data because he wants to analyze the data. But you really need to go beyond the analyzing the data. Be prepared for what people are actually interested in when they see the data. when they see the results, what is it going to tell to the ICTD community? What is the ICTD community going to do with those results? In my case, I have very specific research questions, and I'm going to do participatory design activities, but Kentaro was very keen in telling me, also think about possible research questions that are going to arise once you are doing your participatory design activities, things that might be interesting once you're observing others engaging into these activities. And definitely the what if. In my case, what if your participatory design activities fail? What if your idea, your concept doesn't work? Do you have a backup plan? So be prepared for the unknown is one of the things that we definitely are going to take home. And then what to do with barriers is the second one. This is definitely going to happen that we're going to face barriers. So in Mary's case, she was mentioning that she has a plan. It's a very long research plan, very well detailed, but she's very afraid that she's only in the first phase and she's been there for 6 months and she's not moving forward. And one of the lessons she took, and we are going to take it home too, is don't be afraid to stay in that phase, because there might be richness in that phase that you can go in depth and explore. There might be a lot of research questions that you can explore while you're staying there. Also in Mary's case, there was another question. Her participants don't really want to participate, which is it's an important barrier. And the feedback we got is use a barrier as an opportunity. Why aren't they willing to participate? There might be a lot to understanding that reluctance to participate. So focus on that, and definitely take the advantage of being local. In Mary's case, it's very hard for somebody from outside Iran to go ahead and do research in Iran. So she's local, she knows the people, take that as an advantage, use it towards your research as an advantage. And that's it. Who else? That's my entire team.
Hi, so I'm Esther. I was in Ellen's group, and I'm representing Undrilla and Vikram. So I guess we all had very early stage projects, and they were all very different, but in common, we all sort of wanted to talk about methodologies. So we ended up having kind of an in-depth discussion about methodologies, and particularly in two of the cases, so in mine and Vikram's projects, we were using sort of co-design, or thinking about using co-design and participatory design methodologies. So in my case, I was thinking about using maker spaces to help support repair in extremely remote rural places in the Philippines. And in his case, he was working on using IVR systems for maternal mental health in Rwanda. So like very different contexts, but we sort of have similar struggles, particularly with incorporating a specific technology in the participatory design process that we have already, as technology experts, we have sort of thought about, but the people we're working with really don't know very much about these technologies. So it's really hard for them to come up with, actual technical innovations or like details about how the technology will work. But how do we then, still do participatory design with them and incorporate all of their expertise about their domain? So none of us have that much experience with participatory design, so that's challenging. But we decided that, even if we have to be the technology experts, there's still a way to do this. So in Andrilla's case, it was more on the, her proposed study is coming from sociology, and so she was using more ethnographically inspired methods to try to increase or create policy recommendations for increasing the number of women in digital social enterprises. And so her struggle was that she is trying to choose cases for sort of a case study, and she has a general funding source from the government, so she is sort of free to choose her cases, but how does she market her studies so that social enterprises will allow her to come in and study them? So we were thinking about, various ways to do this. She could try to recruit individuals, or she could go to organizations that are explicitly trying to increase the number of women, but these all have limitations. So that is a nuance. And yeah, that's basically what we talked about.
Test. There we go. So I'm here representing Dr. Gas and Karina Hush. We're mentored by Dr. Aditya Jori, so I'll do my best to represent their work accurately, but just yell at me or say something if I'm not representing it accurately. So first I'll just introduce the 3 studies or topics that we're proposing, and then really go over some of the common threads that I learned as I was sitting there absorbing what we were talking about, and some overall lessons that I think we all drew from our meetings together today. So my personal study is looking at the provision of IT and STEM education that's culturally tailored to Indigenous communities in British Columbia, Canada, acting through an organization up there through the University of British Columbia. And what I did there was I'm proposing taking a post-colonial perspective on looking at how these educational programs are developed and offered to those communities out there. So one of the things that I learned and was struggling with when we were talking about there was how do we connect something that can come off as abstract as post-colonial theory, especially how broad of a framework it's become and the kinds of conceptual frameworks that have come out of that. So fortunate that I was able to walk away with much more confidence in how I'm now approaching that problem, just by really sitting down with a few of these frameworks and thinking deeply how they connect to the data that I'll be looking at and the methods I'll be using. So Turkey Das was looking at an examination of IT adoption across a variety of different institutions using social construction technology and actor network theory as a theoretical framework to frame her study. So she's already relatively far down the path of this study and has collected quite a bit of rich data to examine the topic that she is looking at. So one of the things we talked a little bit about was, what role does a theory play in analyzing this data, especially given how rich it is? So what we were starting to get out of that discussion is that, given the richness of the data, maybe we don't need to put too much of an emphasis on this kind of theoretical framework or reliance on it. We also talked about a few other theories that could also move towards capturing kind of data she's getting, such as socio-materiality and integrated. The other one's a mouthful. I don't remember it. But one of the big findings I think we talked about there was her study, in my mind, was, I think, going to deepen our understanding of digital divide and how it exists beyond the question of access, beyond the question of whether you can get a phone. Now we're talking about things like, what causes people to maybe reject technology, things like emotion, things like pride, things that may not have been served too much in literature. Lastly, Katarina Losch is examining the influx of female CS researchers at the doctoral and graduate level from India and China coming into Germany, and trying to examine, you use their experience in talking to these incoming graduate students to try to understand what some of the stories are behind the reasons behind the demographic disparity in gender between the German context, which actually lags behind both China and India in terms of gender equality in the CS field. So what we got out of that is that in terms of looking at this sort of study, there are a lot of intersections that could be examined, and trying to narrow it down really points to how you're going to approach it theoretically. So right now she's starting from using work from Pierre Boudreau as a framework. So some of the common threads that I got out of this is that, for one thing, we all at least use some form of qualitative methods in our research. It fits the types of topics that we're dealing with. But more theoretically, we're both looking at questions of identity and culture. So we all got to feed a little bit off of how we were going to be looking at our problems, looking at our questions, and that sort of pointed towards some overall lessons for how we're going to be approaching our research. The first thing being, in my mind, was how do we craft these kinds of questions to probe things like identity, where you can't just get good information by literally asking, especially somebody who's younger, things like, how would you define your cultural identity? All right, well, I can't even answer that and I'm an adult. So things like that. One of the other fallouts that we got from our discussions was the various kinds of theories that we use. They can, they produce many different ways in which we can adequately approach a problem. Each one of those approaches will give us a different show, a different kind of presentation. But picking one might be a bit of a challenge, especially when there are many, many options. And lastly, it's just that there are many different ways to look at a particular topic. We spent a lot of time thinking we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, and a lot of that, we could not, hope to do all of that in the space of dissertation research or a single study, but it gives us a lot of good ideas for what we could do, as well as how we could use it to build a research agenda that is fully featured.